Okay, it's 12:10 and looks like we may have enough participants on to get started. And Desiree, the recording is on, yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you. Okay, welcome everybody. This is a meeting of the Assembly Budget Finance Committee of the Whole. It is Thursday, September 17th, 2020. We are noticed from 12:10 to 1:10 p.m. My name is Suzanne LaFrance. I'm the chair, and we are also joined by Vice Chair, Assemblymember Perez Verdilla. And Desiree, would you go ahead and call the roll, please?
Yes. Miss Allard. Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Miss Kennedy.
Here.
Miss LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Perez Verdilla.
Here.
Miss Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Miss Zalatel.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great, thank you so much, Desiree. Okay, we will go ahead and start with new business. Let me just mention that documents for today are available online at muni.org. Assembly, go to committees on the left, budget and finance webpage, and you can pull up the documents that we'll be referring to today on the agenda. For members who wish to speak, please put yourself in the chat or text me at 907-351-7199. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. Nolan Clauda, Mr. Clauda, are you on? Let's see, I don't think I see him. We can come back to a report from the Budget Advisory Commission. And we'll go ahead and move on then to item B, CARES Act funding, Coronavirus Relief Fund. And is there someone from the administration who is available to give an update? I know Mr. Wilbur's out, but I believe Mr. Slipka and Ms. Bonzoff are on.
This actually, I think I'm going to defer to Jason to provide an update.
Mr. Bockenstead?
Yes, hi, thank you. I think that really the couple of updates that we have are somewhat of a repeat of everything that the mayor said during his mayor's report, which is to say that we are now up over on the rental and mortgage assistance program. We have now provided relief to over 3,000 individuals, totaling, I believe, just over $3 million to date so far. And I'll say that some of the anecdotal information that we're receiving from folks in the community is that their delinquency rate is still relatively low from landlords and things like that. So this program seems to be doing its job. It's working. It's helping people stay current on their rent and their mortgage. So we're going to continue to obviously push the remaining amount, which is roughly $20 million, into this program to continue to help folks that have been impacted. On the child care program for the $10 million, we have made one-time infusion payments, and we are starting kind of the monthly payments between now and the end of the year. I believe that roughly a little over $3 million has also gone out to almost 175 locations here in the municipality. So that is also being very successful. And I believe that both the Assembly and the administration have received kind of updates from different child care centers around town, just kind of discussing how valuable this program has been to them in terms of being able to keep their doors open and provide relief to families, and also make sure that they're doing everything they possibly can to keep all of our little ones safe on a day-to-day basis. Again, the other one that the mayor mentioned was the $5 million small business grant program. That application period just closed this past Saturday evening. So Silk, who is our third party that is helping us administer that, are pulling all of those applications together, and we fully expect that. I believe the end of this week and maybe even tomorrow is when some of the decisions are going to be made through the randomized selection process. So we expect to start getting that money out into the community, I think, as early as next week. And then, as the mayor also mentioned, we have reached agreement with CHAR to help us distribute quite a bit of the hospitality money, a little over $7 million that was set aside for them. So we're working out the final details with them, and hopefully that money will also be getting out to the hospitality industry in the very near future. And then the final update, and I believe that this will likely be a work session or at some point the next 2 weeks, is we did introduce the ordinance on Tuesday night to move quite a bit of the funding that was approved to first responder payroll that would then free up general government revenue to be used for the same exact program. So we'll be happy to talk in more depth about that at a future work session over the next couple of weeks or on the 29th. So unless there are any questions, that is my update.
Thank you, Mr. Bockenstead. There are 3 people, Mr. Weddleton, Ms. Zelatel, and Ms. Kennedy in the queue, though some of their questions may have to do with that first responder payroll, but we'll go to Mr. Weddleton first.
Well, thanks. So Jason, we have, we don't let franchises get those grants. And I wonder if that's something that really makes sense. And if it doesn't, can we change it? And I know if Chris Schuette's there, he's given some rationale that the expectation is that, franchise systems would have some method of helping out their franchisees. And I'm not sure that most or any franchises are actually that friendly towards their franchisees. So anyway, your thoughts on that? And is it something that we can open up to franchises?
Yeah, I don't know if Mr. Bockenstead or...
I was checking to see if Chris Schuette was on the phone, and I don't believe that he is, and because I was going to defer to him. He has been the one that has spent the most time with that, and like you said, I believe he's sent out a number of updates to the Assembly regarding those questions. But I think it's certainly something that we will continue to explore, and I can get you a more detailed answer from him very quickly.
Thanks.
Anything else, Mr. Weddleton?
No, that's good for now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Zelatel?
Thanks, Ms. LaFrance. And I will just email my question in regarding the CARES Act item, since we'll be having a work session separately on that particular issue, so that you're ready to address it in advance of the work session. But I do have a follow-up question. Is there any proposals coming from the administration on CARES Act that could assist the taxi industry? We heard quite a bit Tuesday night that while the ordinance before the body is one way, or are they eligible for some of the other programs that we've put forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question through the chair, Assembly Member Zelatel, and it is my understanding that they are eligible for a number of the other programs that we have out there. And I want to say, and I'll have to go back and verify unless Chris gets on. I texted him. I think he's going to join here momentarily. But I believe that in the first round of the small business, nonprofit, and sole proprietor grants that we put out, that there were a handful of taxi cab drivers that were successful in receiving some of the grants. So I don't know how many maybe applied under this $5 million grant, but I will find out for you.
Thank you very much. And I think it might go also to a bit of the franchise question as well, because they are, some of them operating under very familiar names. So I'm not sure if they're franchisees or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. Ms. Kennedy, and then Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I want to echo what Mr. Weddleton started off with, and that was in regard to the franchise folks. Obviously, they're not getting the help that they need, and that's a big concern to me, to think that we're kind of in the business of excluding certain businesses. So I'm definitely concerned about that. And we're continuing to get remarks or comments from people that says, well, I'm not being helped. And so I'm hoping that we're really trying to figure out how to get past that, because that's, if somebody says they need help, they need help. And I don't think we ought to be so exclusionary on some of the criteria that we end up actually keeping people from getting any kind of help. And then, of course, the obvious result of that is that they lose their business, and we lose another business in Anchorage. So I continue to have those kinds of concerns, and I want to make sure, so this kind of segues into my next question or maybe comment, that the CARES Act funding that we have allocated is actually doing the things that it's intended to do, and that we really are helping people in the best sense of the word. So I want to make sure too that, I guess we're having a work session then. Sorry if I have dinner going off here. So I understand we are having a work session on the late on the table item that we introduced on Tuesday night in regard to the restructuring of the funding source for the different CARES Act allocations that we had approved previously. So I just want verification on that. And if that's true, then I will hold my questions for that specifically until that time. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Yes, there will be a work session, though I do not know the date and time, and perhaps Chair Rivera or Mr. Bockenstead, do you have that information?
Madam Chair, I can address that really quick. Yes, there will be a work session. No, there is not yet a date and time set.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. I want to note for the record. Oh,
thanks.
Sorry, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you. Did you have other questions?
No.
Thank you.
Just want to say thank you, and that's it. Thanks.
I just want to note for the record, we've been joined by Ms. Allard. Go ahead, Mr. Bockenstead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Chris Schutte has joined us, so I don't know if he wanted to chime in and maybe answer a portion of the franchise question and put that onto the record.
If I could just jump in quick.
Yes, Mr. Constant, go right ahead.
Thank you.
And we'll go to Mr. Schutte.
I look forward to the technical answer from Mr. Schutte. The practical reality, though, is the $290 million from the state for small businesses is oversubscribed, more applicants than money. And I believe the pool under the requirements that we set up this go round too is oversubscribed, meaning more applicants than we have money. And so that makes for a difficult conversation in regards to expanding eligibility. So that's just part of the conversation we'll have to have. So I look forward to Mr. Schutte's comments.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm not sure if somebody could repeat the questions. I joined literally a second ago, so I don't know which questions I'm answering, but I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Schutte. There was a question raised by Mr. Weddleton and echoed by others about franchises. And if we're able to provide assistance through them. And I know you have responded to some members on that there's money available in other ways for them, but that remains a concern. And then also taxis, are they eligible for other programs? And raised by Ms. Zelatil that, you know, some of them may in fact be franchises. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that summary. So through the chair, I'll sort of work in reverse order. Short answer on taxi cabs is that taxi cabs are an eligible business were an eligible business entity for applying to the municipality for both the $1 million pilot program and the $5 million supplement. In fact, there were a number of, well, not a number, there were several taxi cab drivers or business owners who were awarded grants in the $1 million pilot program, and we haven't seen the selections yet in the $5 million program yet, so I can't speak to that one. To the point of franchises, though, franchises, you know, when we developed the small business relief program, we looked to some of the best practices that have been stood up across the country, and largely drew from those examples when developing the Anchorage model, and worked closely with our partner, Cook Inlet Lending Center. Franchises present a little bit of a challenge because of the way that franchises are typically structured and the royalty payments or franchise payments that those industries are required to make. And from a local economic development standpoint, because our program was designed to be low barrier, unlike the AK CARES program, which has very strict boundaries on what can and can't be eligible expenses for those relief funds. We wanted to make our relief program easier to administer if you're a small business. And to do that, we removed most of the limits on what the relief funds could be spent on in order to grant the greatest flexibility possible to the small businesses. What that did set up, however, is the ability of franchises to receive Anchorage CARES Act dollars, but then turn around and spend those CARES Act dollars on the mandatory franchise fees and royalty payments that franchises typically have to make to a corporate entity located outside of the state. So based on the examples of other communities that had wrestled with that question as well, and through consultation with our partner Cook Inlet Lending Center, it was determined that since we're not going to police whether or not a business is spending money on outside franchise payments or royalty payments, that we just did not allow franchises to be eligible applicants to this $5 million or $1 million and then $5 million pot of money. There is an exception to that, though, and the exception to that is in the hospitality grant program that the Assembly authorized. And the reason there's an exception in that program is simply because of volume. In the hospitality industry, particularly in the quick service restaurant or fast food business, there is almost nothing but franchises here in Anchorage and in Alaska. And so that program and the participants who helped develop that program all agreed that there should not be an exclusion on franchises in that case. So that program will allow them. This program did not. And I think that's all of the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schutte. I've got two folks in the queue. And Mr. Constant, is this on franchises?
It's back on the cabs.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll go to Mr. Constant and then Mr. Weddleton on franchises.
Thanks, Chris. The applicants for relief that did secure funding through the first program that were cabs, were they dispatchers, owners, or drivers, right? Because these systems are very complex.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would have to go back and look. I'll see if I can do it on the fly while I'm talking to you. My recollection of the list is that they were individuals, not the dispatch companies, but I'm talking and searching at the same time. So give me a second here.
Because we certainly heard from them that there wasn't eligibility. So we definitely want to boil down to who where, when, why, and how. Thanks.
Okay.
Sure.
Thanks, Mr. Constant. We'll go to Mr. Weddleton back on franchises.
All right, thanks. So Chris, I think your, point on money perhaps flowing out for royalty fees and so on is possibly true. But, for any of the grants we give, if you give it to a retail store and they use it to pay their vendors who are almost inevitably going to be in the lower 48, the money flows out of the economy too. So pretty much up here, business in Alaska means if it's not to an employee, it's money going out from the economy anyway. But the business still needs to put merchandise on the shelves or whatever they do, or buy equipment and so on. So, any of the grants is going to have a huge amount flow outside of the economy. And when Nelson Clouda gets on to the meeting, he can embellish on that, I'm sure. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I think that's a very real recognition, and probably something that Nolan will speak to if he gets on later. The fact of the matter is that the programs, no matter how they're crafted, there's not funding available at the federal, state, or local level that makes businesses whole. And the challenge has been in using the limited pool allotted to Anchorage. How can we distribute funds as equitably and equally as possible? And so in looking at the various grant programs, whether we're talking nonprofits or small businesses, et cetera, we have, that we've tried to make as few criteria as possible to those programs, so it's a very low barrier to entry, but also you have to have some boundaries on what can and can't be an eligible applicant. And so in the case of the franchises for small businesses, there are very few, or there are fewer, I guess I should say, in general small business than there are in, say, just the food industry specifically. Ultimately, the collective decision was to exclude the franchises.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Schutte. Mr. Weddleton, are you good on that?
I'm done on that, but I'm very sympathetic to franchises because I can't imagine anyone suffering under that kind of business arrangement. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Okay, one last comment from Mr. Constant, and then we're going to move back to item A, the Budget Advisory Commission report. Mr. Constant?
Yep, thanks, Chris. One thing you didn't speak to, though, was the practical reality of how many applicants we have relative to the amount of money we have. Can you speak to that, please? Specifically,
yes, thank you.
The small business grants.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. So through the chair, as I mentioned, at a federal, state, and local level, there's not enough relief fund out there to actually provide the relief that's needed by the businesses in any given community. Here in Anchorage, for example, with the $5 million program wrapping up and selection about to occur, we already know that program is oversubscribed by nearly $10 million. So there's $6 million that's been put on the street for small businesses, and just based on the volume of eligible applicants that got in the door as of the closure date, there's an unmet need of $10 million at least. So there's a large need out there. There's a lot of people applying, and our goal is to keep this as low barrier as possible so that we can get the money flowed out as quickly as possible to provide that lifeline for a lot of these businesses.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schutte. Was that all, Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So,
Suzanne, if you're talking, you've muted yourself somehow.
geez, thanks. Okay, we're going to go back to item A, report from the Budget Advisory Commission. We've got Mr. Clouda on, and Mr. Clouda, if you would go ahead.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get into the quick report from Budget Advisory Commission, the discussion about franchises, I'm not sure that I have any specific information to weigh in on that discussion. I think Mr. Weddleton is right as far as from a use of money and whether it stays local or not. That's not super clear cut of a distinction between franchises and others, but I do understand prioritizing franchise business types as a way of dealing with scarcity of funds. But otherwise, I probably wouldn't have anything specific to weigh in on that. So for the Budget Advisory Commission, we're a couple of things that we have moving right now. One is the review of the budget process. We did just receive the 120-day memo. I mean, we received it upon its release, the 120-day memo. We haven't specifically gotten into the details of it as a group to offer any guidance or opinions, but as I think this group knows, we on the commission we've divided up all of most of the major departments of the municipality and done deep dives on them. And so I've done the fire department, but we also have planning, parks and recreation, police, the health department, and most of the larger ones represented in that group. So we are able to provide a much deeper level of review as the budget cycle progresses. Our last meeting we devoted primarily to, we did receive an update from the school district, but we also devoted primarily to looking at the breakdown of CARES funding, approved by the Assembly, and the specific framing that we looked at was really about the 15 million in contingency, the unallocated portion of the funding. We put most of our efforts toward thinking about what maybe some of the best use of that program or of that funding might be, and there should be a resolution forthcoming from us, very very shortly. And what the main thrust of our recommendation in that resolution is three main areas that I think are candidates for increased funding based on our review of what's needed and what could be prioritized. And the three areas that we think could use additional funding, one of them is small business relief funding. I think that the amount that's been put into it so far, I think that you've had programs at the federal level and the state level, and I can understand why that's created a sense that there's maybe limited leverage at the local level, but we did think that a little bit more funding there would be helpful. Another area is childcare. It has become clear, I think, in the last few weeks and months, there's been more data coming out nationally about how much trouble childcare providers are in. There was one national study showed that 40% of childcare providers are at risk of going under. Don't know what it looks like locally per se, other than that it's not good. So that does present something of what could be sort of a structural problem for us with the workforce trying to return. The third area is workforce development. The opportunity for retraining and reskilling and upskilling, some of the vogue terms now, is pretty high among the workforce. A lot of the laid off workers have been folks that are disproportionately younger, relatively lower earning on average, and they in many ways this does make them good candidates for being able to increase their skill set, and while they're dealing with unemployment or underemployment. And so those three areas, childcare, small business relief, and I should say small business nonprofit relief, and workforce are the areas that we would say, should more funding become available, or ability to reallocate more funding, or even additional money that comes from Congress down the road, those would be three areas that we would suggest as priorities. So you should see a resolution to that effect. Otherwise we're going to be addressing the budget cycle and still have some work to do on some final recommendations regarding the alcohol tax proceeds. But with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Nolan. Appreciate the update and all the work you and the other commissioners are doing. We'll look forward to getting your resolution. Do members have any questions? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone in the queue. Thank you again for your report and for all the work that you're doing. Very much appreciate the feedback.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks. Okay, we will go ahead and move on to, update on the 2020 budget. And I just want to note that we have the July expenditure report, which is AIM 122-2020, available on our committee webpage. And we'll start with the monthly budget to actuals report. And I believe Marilyn Bonzoff is filling in for Mr. Wilbur.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a overview of the budget to actual report that's presented in this AIM. We're 58.4% through the year, but only 53.5% spent or encumbered, or pardon me, and encumbered. There are other expenditures that we're expecting through the rest of the year, like leave cash out, holiday cash out for fire, that will probably realign the actuals more with the budget by the time we get to the end of the year. At this time, I don't believe there's any departments that are at risk of going over. We will continue to report the budget to actuals. I believe our August report should be coming out. We haven't yet closed August, so as soon as August is closed, then our report will be coming out at the forthcoming assembly meeting.
Great, thank you, Mr. Bonzoff, or Ms. Bonzoff. Do you have any comments on the impacts of COVID-19 on the budget? We've got that as a standing item on the agenda.
Not at this time. I believe for the most part, the COVID impacts, the COVID response activity is actually accounted for outside of the operating budget for the most part. So other than that, I have no comments.
Great, thanks for that update. And I don't see any members in the queue. And we've got a number of other items on the agenda. So we'll go ahead and move on. And actually, if you would also be able to provide an update to the 2021 budget schedule, if there's anything we need to be notified, any changes, or just review the existing schedule.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The deliverable, the latest deliverable from the administration, it was the 120-day memo, as previously mentioned by Mr. Clauda. It is available at the OMB website to the public. It was an overview of revenue tax limit calculation and the capital budgets and utility and enterprise information. The next deliverable is the actual budget documents on October 2nd.
Great, thank you for that update and for filling in for Mr. Wilbur. I don't see any questions in the queue. So we'll go ahead and continue to move on to item E, MOA financial status. And I just want to note before we get to item A with the revenues report and revenue impacts, item B, that AIM 123-2020 revenue status report as of August 26, 2020 is also available on the committee's webpage. So Mr. Slivka, if you would like to address the MOA financial status.
Certainly, at a broad overview, we are in good shape financially. Very specifically, in terms of the revenue report, I'm going to ask Mr. Dan Moore, our treasurer, to speak to both that item, and what will go hand in hand with that is the impact based on COVID-19.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
This is Dan Moore, Madam Chair. Am I okay to speak?
Oh, yes, please, Mr. Moore. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I'm glad you just referenced the fact that the Assembly on Tuesday night received the most current formal written report That was as of August 26th. We're now 3 weeks later. And so what I'm going to be able to provide today is sort of a verbal update of anything that's changed in the last 3 weeks. Really the only significant change in the last 3 weeks, and we just learned about it within the last couple days, is the investment earnings from the cash pool had an additional negative variance of $1.6 million since late August. And so that brings the budgeted amount for investment earnings on cash pool below what was budgeted. So it has a negative variance with respect to the budget. It's a little bit in the hole by about $1 million. That particular account is going to vary a lot every single month from now to the end of the year. What we were told by the Public Finance Division is that the original assumed cash balances were lower than they initially expected. They thought some people may have paid based on a different timing than what they had planned. So because of the timing of cash flows, that did affect the return. But in addition to that, the really big month-to-month factor is the volatility in the fixed income market. And that's something the city has no control over. We just have to write it out. So anyway, that's the biggest change of all the big changes. That is the big change in the last 3 weeks. There are two other areas that actually are showing some positive sign. Marijuana sales continue to have a positive upward movement above and beyond the budget. So it's an additional $200,000 improvement is what we are projecting for this year. And overall for the year, it would be $700,000 above budget. The other one is in the Building Safety Fund. And I believe this may have been due to the drop in interest rates and to the discounted fees. But we have less of a negative variance for that fund. And so it improved $160,000 just in the last few weeks. And overall for the year 2020, the Building Safety Fund is going to, we're projecting it'll be under budget by $370,000. Just in respect to COVID type revenues, what's interesting when we look at the numbers is the overall projected negative variance, and I apologize, I should have said this right from the beginning like I usually do, but it's $18.2 million, a negative revenue variance for 2020. That's what's currently projected. That is $1.2 million worse than what we said about a month ago to this committee. And again, it's just those three things. It's the big change, negative change in investment earnings, and the positive with marijuana, and the positive movement with Building Safety Fund. So, but in terms of just categorizing, the biggest of that $18 million negative variance, negative revenue variance, the 74% of it is in two areas which relate to tourism and business travel, and that would be in room tax and rental vehicle tax. So nearly 3/4 of the variance is due to those two areas. Another 22% is due to the need to restrict movement of people around the city, and also sponsorship of programs that might draw crowds of people. So due to closures, restrictions, social distancing requirements, that's another $4 million. That affected motor fuel tax, parks and rec fees, transit fees, library fees, health fees. So between those two major categories, they're all very much COVID related. That's 96% of the variance for 2020. The remainder are just sort of normal variances other than the investment earnings that we typically would see in any normal year. One other point I was going to bring up is sort of a silver lining for. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Actually, Mr. Weddleton had a question a few minutes back, and if you don't mind, Mr. Weddleton.
Yeah, thanks. So Dan, you said investment earnings were down, which surprised me. I thought we'd seen a bunch up, but we had something on the agenda this past Tuesday that would pay our money managers more because investment earnings were up and they were busier, if I understand that right. Can you comment on that?
Well, they're still earning money, but but compared to budget, it's below budget. And Alex can fill that in a little bit more.
Yeah, and it really the change that you're seeing reflecting is when we put together our assumptions for the year back in earlier in the year, there was assumptions about when taxes would be paid and the amount that would be earned. And I think what you're seeing in this most recent revision is the realization that because property taxes were pushed out, we had less money in the cash pool, and because interest rates were lower, we earned less money. So what you're seeing here is the actualization of the impact of those changes. I will say that the amount of money that is being earned has actually gone up, which is why we needed to have that authorization on Tuesday. It's just not being earned in general government. It's being earned on cash balances that are in funds outside of the 100 funds.
Anything else,
Thanks.
Mr. Weddleton, on that?
No, that's good. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I just had one other point I was going to bring up. One of the silver linings for 2020 that's distinct from the COVID issues and all that is the sale of ML&P, which is planned for the end of October. One of the biggest impacts from that, it actually affects revenues. It's in the MOA Trust Fund, and it will add a significant amount of additional money to the trust fund. As a result of that, we've been working for well over a year trying to plan out more diversification of those investments, and also to look at revising the dividend payout formula that's in the code. So one of the things that was introduced this past Tuesday to the Assembly was AO 2020-98, and that is a revision to the municipal code related to the trust fund. The trust fund, from a revenue standpoint, just in terms of the magnitude for 2020, this is the silver lining. Last year in 2019, the trust fund paid $6.5 million of an annual dividend. For 2020, with the assumption of the sale of ML&P, the successful closure of that transaction, the budget for 2020 is going to be $14.0 million. So it's an increase of $7.5 million of revenue in just a single year. And that's a very significant increase on the revenue side. We typically don't see many revenues that provide that additional revenue. It's also a more general revenue. It's area-wide. It's outside the tax cap. It's a very special revenue. So anyway, based on the changes that we are making through this AO 2020-98, we've put a lot of effort into those recommended changes, and we worked with our Investment Advisory Commission and with our investment consultant. And we have a very comprehensive presentation to make to the Assembly, and to give a very holistic view of the MOA Trust Fund, what it's about, what it's designed to do in the long term. And we would like the opportunity, if possible, to present that to the Assembly at a work session. And we were hoping to maybe have one, I guess we would need one, maybe next Thursday or Friday, whatever works for the Assembly. But we were totally prepared to involve the Investment Commission and our consultant, and to give a very, very strong presentation on what the trust fund is all about. So I just want to bring that up, since we are talking about revenues, and we're only about a week away from that time period. So that's all I had for our summary today.
Thanks so much, Mr. Moore. Appreciate the update and the information. And I would imagine that members would be very interested in a work session. And I know Mr. Rivera is on, and we can just probably work out the details behind the scenes on that. Do members have any questions or comments? Okay, thanks again, Mr. Moore. Appreciate the information. Alrighty, we've got less than 20 minutes left, and we do have a few items on the agenda, so we'll just get through what we can. The next one is the update on the pay audits, and actually Ms. Marshall, who couldn't be here today, provided some information, provided a report, and it is also posted on the committee webpage, and I'll just run through it, and if anyone from the administration wants to comment. So this is the report for the Budget Finance Committee of 9/17. Oh, and actually, Mr. Slivka says he can speak to it. You want to go ahead, Mr. Slivka?
Well, I was going to speak on the next item. I think relative
okay.
to pay audits, whatever Susie provided is what's accurate.
Okay, so she just went over, why pay audits. The goal is to review all payroll corrections submitted since we went live with SAP on September 11, 2017. The goal is to double check that the payroll correction was completed without error, provide the employees and the unions with a completed audit per person. This process started in January 2020. Number of audits completed to date, 374. Number of audits waiting for final review, 70. The next batch will be 77 audits, and legal will be identifying the next batch beyond the 77 currently identified. And again, that's posted on the webpage. And I'll pause if there's anyone, Mr. Falsey or anyone else from the administration who wanted to provide further comment. Okay, so we will go ahead on to item G, which Mr. Slivka noted he could speak to. And actually, Ms. Camacho had sent out your email, Mr. Slivka, that you had shared with members following our last meeting when Ms. Kennedy brought up the question. So we are on item G, which is discussion on possible reduction in tax rate charged to businesses for personal property 2021. So Mr. Slivka?
So this actually goes hand in hand with item H, which is the revision to various parts of the tax code, which we have presented to you in a work session about 6 weeks ago, and which was introduced. What we are able to do in talking through in terms of a systems capability, what's proposed in there is to, in the goal of achieving equity across the tax structure, is to raise the exemption for personal property for businesses from its current level of 20,000 to 50,000, which would equal the current level of exemption that is given to residential property owners. So again, providing equity between business personal property and residential property. What we have confirmed is that the ordinance as it's currently drafted indicated that change, which would result in a reduction in taxes levied for personal property on businesses, would take effect in 2022. We have confirmed that we can, in fact, make that effective in 2021. And so if that was a change that the Assembly wanted to consider when they hear this ordinance on the 29th, that is something we could accommodate. More specifically to the question of can we charge a different rate, I think I've shared many times that we tax at a uniform rate across both personal property and residential property. Trying to tax at different rates is extraordinarily problematic, but it also raises very large questions in terms of equity. So we can, I think, accomplish this goal by raising the exemption level. And I think hopefully that will satisfy what you're looking for, but I will stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Slivka. We've got Mr. Dunbar in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Slivka. I am a little concerned about that kind of plan for two reasons. One, because, I mean, it's true that we have 50,000 for primary residence as the exemption, but it does seem like kind of an arbitrary number for personal property taxes at small businesses, or sorry, at businesses. It's sort of a little bit like apples and oranges, to be honest, given, you know, some organizations have massive personal property holdings. Others have relatively small, and I would assume less than 50,000 even, versus the residential property tax exemption, 50,000. There are very few residences where 50,000 covers the entirety of the property. The other thing I'll say is, I mean, again, because we've had this conversation before, but it's worth having again. When you when you change things underneath the tax cap like this, and this is one of my hesitancies with when we did raise the residential property tax exemption, it doesn't apply to renters. So effectively what we did, and I saw we did some other things with the fuel tax at the same time to try to hold them harmless, because we had put that under the tax cap as well. But effectively you are shifting tax burden from property owners from homeowners onto renters, and not all renters, but most renters. And this would do the same thing, right? We would be having a tax break for businesses, and the tab would be picked up by residential property owners. Isn't that the case, Mr. Slifka, or am I misinterpreting things?
You're stating it accurately that if under the tax cap calculation, if less taxes are collected from businesses, they would be collected from residential. I think that the impact is going to be relatively minor, but we can certainly do some math to show you what the change is going to look like. We collect 50 million in personal property tax from business. We collect 500 million from residential property. So it's a very small. If there is going to be a shift, I imagine it's going to be fairly small.
Right. I mean, but it's also interesting. I mean, the kind of, so large apartment complexes are businesses, right? But I don't think they're the kind that have, actually, I don't know. Do those businesses have the kind of personal property that would be able to avail themselves of this kind of exemption? If that's the case, then perhaps these renters would see some kind of benefit. But I'm just worried that this is the second sort of these kind of shifts in a row where renters in multifamily housing are not going to see the benefit, and we continue to shift a larger portion of the tax burden onto them, and I find it a little bit troubling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And actually, Mr. Slifka, if you don't mind, I'll check here. We've got Mr. Gadamus and then also Mr. Gates in the queue, who I believe want to speak to this point. So Mr. Gadamus, and then we'll go to Ms. Kennedy and Ms. Allard.
Yeah, through the chair, we did look at this, and we are taking this seriously as far as the shifts that would happen. And it is true, it would shift the tax burden onto others. And that number, when we looked at it, increasing from $20,000 business exemption to 50 would be roughly about $82 million of assessed value that would shift. And to put that in perspective, that would be about 0.2% of the total tax base. Personal property is a relatively smaller portion of the total tax base. It really, the big portion, the big piece of the pie for our tax base is that real property sector.
Thank you, Mr. Gadamus. Mr. Gates, you wanted to comment on the residential exemption?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Listening to Mr. Dunbar talk about the residential real property tax exemption that we raised from 20,000 to 50,000 and its effect, I just wanted to remind everyone that residential property tax exemption was only available to residential properties that were owned and occupied by an applicant, by the owner. And so it didn't apply to residential properties that were occupied by tenants and renters. And so I just wanted to avoid any mischaracterization that residential owners benefited and didn't pass it on to renters, because it's only applied, the residential exemption only applies to properties where the owner occupies it and not where it's occupied by a bunch of tenants. So that, I think, having tenants not having the benefit of that is not quite an accurate characterization. But anyway, that's sort of an offshoot. And what Mr. Slivka is saying, I agree with that. The business personal property tax exemption, if it's raised, it shifts that burden to all residential properties, not just residential owner-occupied properties, but all residential. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. And before we move back to the queue, I just want to comment that we have just over 5 minutes left. I want to leave some time for audience participation. And clearly, we won't be able to deal with these two AOs with any thoroughness. And I know for AO 2029-8 concerning the trust fund, as Mr. Moore mentioned, the administration has a presentation to be scheduled. I think we should likely schedule a work session for this taxation ordinance. And so bearing that in mind, maybe we can kind of quickly move through the queue, but I just want to touch back with Mr. Dunbar. Are you good for now, or did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just put it in the chat, but I think I was trying to say the same thing that Mr. Gates did. I don't know if that came across clearly, but yeah, I was very aware when we raised that it was not going to renters. And yeah, I guess to reiterate to Treasury, or to Mr. Slifka, if you could create similar modeling as you did back during that residential exemption increase, that would be helpful. Although, as Mr. Gadamus pointed out, it's only 0.2% because, yeah, it's a relatively small number. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. We'll go to Ms. Kennedy and then Ms. Allard. And then when we get to 110, I'm going to ask for a motion to extend for 10 minutes or whenever. Ms. Kennedy?
Would you like, thank you, Madam Chair. Would you like that motion now?
I kind of would.
Okay, I would move to extend the meeting an extra 10 minutes.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know if we need to vote on that or not. Okay. My question is in regard to, well, my concern is in regard to the shifting of the tax burden as well. And when I initially started to talk about this idea of trying to do something for the inventory, the personal inventory taxes on those businesses that were shut down during COVID, it was an effort that would, I thought, be a temporary one. We would just do some kind of temporary response to say, for those 2 months, maybe there would be certain businesses that we know were shut down. I mean, if you were in the construction industry, you could be open, but furniture stores, jewelry stores, gift shops, art stores, they were all closed down. So the idea is that for those who are paying some kind of property tax because their inventory is over that $20,000 threshold, that we would just basically this year for 2021 give them a 2-month break, which would, I think, comes out to like 18%, 16, 18%, something like that. I don't remember now. That we would give them that tax break just for 2021 for those months that they were basically not able to move their inventory. So I have concerns that we're working on something that is permanent, even though I absolutely know there are lots of businesses who will appreciate that difference. But again, it comes down to the fairness of shifting the tax burden, and I want to be fair, and that was my whole reason for bringing up the fact that why are we taxing people for 2 months worth of inventory when they weren't allowed to sell or move that inventory. So I'm kind of back to square one on how we really do fix that potential unfairness. So if we are going to have more of a conversation on this, I hope that we will definitely look more into how we respond appropriately to the impacts of COVID, but not necessarily do things that are more permanent and long-term. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Slifka, did you want to comment?
No, I think it makes sense to have the work session. I know we've had this conversation extensively about why we could not, enact the change that Ms. Kennedy had requested. And the brief review is we tax inventory on a one-time basis based on what inventory is in the business's possession on January 1st. What we were able to do this year is to push the payment of those taxes all the way from normally being received in August and October all the way to December 31st. So we've given people a lot of time. We don't really tax people on what their inventory is every month, and I know Ms. Kennedy does understand that. So I look forward to the discussion. I think that it's a real challenge to try and craft something that would achieve that goal, and thus when we drafted these revisions to tax code, we put something together that we thought was as equitable as possible to all taxpayers. But I would look forward to the session.
Thank you, Mr. Slivka. It sounds like we will definitely have a work session on this item. And Ms. Kennedy, did you have any further comments, or can I go ahead and move on?
Well, yeah, move on, because I do think we're making this harder than we need to be, and I think there are some simpler solutions. So I'm looking forward to the conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Allard?
Yeah, thank you. I after hearing everything that just transpired before me, yeah, absolutely having a work session. So I'll hold my suggestions and my opinions till then. And maybe, Madam Chair, if you can consider, this is just me, I don't know how everybody else feels about it, but I think this could be a lengthy conversation about the taxes, and perhaps we can somehow have it in person. That's all. This is a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. And that is something that Mr. Rivera will need to consider, as he will be handling any of the work sessions for this. Okay, let's see. I don't see anyone else in the queue. So we kind of had a blitz discussion on items G and H with taxation. And yes, we will have a work session, which Mr. Rivera will be scheduling. And then item I, again, Mr. Moore mentioned that the administration has a presentation and we'll be scheduling that as well. So that brings us to item J, other business. Is there anything we missed? I'm almost afraid to ask. Okay, I don't see anybody in the queue. Then we will just touch on 4, the committee legislative and budget priorities. I do not have any updates on these 2 items. You know that the chair and vice chair shared with us the budget priorities letter to the administration for 2021. And does anyone have any comments? Looks like Ms. Zelatil. Oh, Ms. Zelatil is signing off. Thank you for joining. I know Mr. Constant had to leave as well. Anybody have any comments regarding the priorities? Okay, that brings us to audience participation. If there are any members of the public who wish to speak.
Hello?
Oh, Mr. Haberman?
Yep, it's me. Okay.
Okay.
I'll start my timer, but I'll be very brief.
Okay.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman, and you all know me. Number 1 point, I listened with strong interest to the presentations and the meeting. I also looked at the attachments and saw what was there. What was basically missing when I was hearing the presentations was a lack of written information to the reports to reference COVID and the numbers and financial situation regarding the municipality of Anchorage. I mean, I heard some numbers verbally in this meeting, but when you look at the attachments, the bulk of that is basically legislation, and it doesn't have written reports pertaining to COVID and the numbers of what you heard, numbers of plus and minus or whatever in cost dealing with COVID, but that did not appear in any attachments. So one is, my concern is particularly is that one would have expected a written report and continued update in the financial situation of how is COVID affecting the financial situation in the municipality of Anchorage. And that creates a situation that you have to listen to the entire meeting and hope to capture some pieces, but that should all have been in written form for the public to see and for you to see, with all due respect. And I that's all I have to say, except for just a reminder, the meeting for tomorrow at 10 o'clock that you have scheduled, please make sure security and COVID people are ready, and so the public can get in there before you start that meeting at 10 o'clock at the Assembly Chambers. And thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Haberman. We will take your suggestions into advisement. Are there any other members of the public here who wish to testify? *6 to unmute. Okay, I'll just give it another minute. Anyone else who wishes to speak? *6 to unmute or text me 907-351-7199 if you're having problems.
Ms. Chair, this is Alex Slivka. I just would like to add that in comment that the information that is provided to the Assembly in regards to expenditures and revenue does reflect the COVID impact, and those reports, especially the one that was posted at the Tuesday meeting, does reflect the negative $18 million in revenue. So that information is available in a printed format, and we do provide it regularly, along with all the additional information that the Assembly is providing to the public on the monies we are spending in relation to the COVID response. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Slivka. And we do our best to post on the committee page for the convenience of the meetings. And definitely, if you or members of the administration or members of the Assembly see some items that we are missing posting, please let us know, because it's our intent to share that information as widely as we can. So thank you for that. And I don't see anyone else who wishes to testify. So thank you all for joining today, and have a good rest of the week. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.